Welcome to Sci-Fi Book Trek.
Hello.
So today we're dealing with a British science fiction horror novel. I say novel, it's tiny. It's somewhat of a short story, I would say. But it's The Space Vampires, written by Colin Wilson. And as you can probably tell, there's two different covers that we've got, two different variations.
This is an earlier version, which was done in 1976, I believe, or 77, the year after it was published. That is a more current one.
As you can tell by the impact font and the blurriness of the picture, that appears to be a design choice, a deliberate design choice.
That cover is far, far better, although slightly odder.
That said,
what was your initial view of it?
Well, there's the thing. Having now read the book, I'm wondering whether it's a deliberate choice to look like a porn novel. I've got to be honest. I did enjoy it. There's a couple of questionable points that I got to admit. It's like, okay, that's an interesting choice. But no, there's some interesting themes in the book. Certainly on sexuality. There's some BDSM elements in there if you really want to be reading into that.
Well, I mean, it mostly sort of covers that, like, between sadomasochism and, misogyny, and, like, someone who's in charge and someone who's passive.
Yes. The dominant and the submissive.
Yes.
Or in the book, it's more like a predator-prey type idea. But I think the misogyny, more so than anything else, possibly comes from the time period that it was written.
I'd say misogyny, but I don't think it gets too bad until, I would say, the epilogue, where it's just like, you could have saved it, but the epilogue just goes, no, it feels very sort of one-sided and misogynistic. But like I say, it's not the worst, but it is there.
But again, you've got to remember as well that this was a book written in the 1970s. And
well, yes, but this was like a decade after the sexual revolution.
True.
So I'm willing to give it like some leeway, but there's also, it does feel like this was written by a male author with all male characters doing male things from a male standpoint.
Yes, that
so
is
it can come across as that. I don't think it was fully intentional, but it's just because from the viewpoint,
I would say product of the time.
Yes.
Yeah. But we can discuss that a little bit further as we get into certainly the spoilers territory, and as we get a little bit further on into perhaps the themes and the ideas of the book.
Well, let's go on to that. The themes of it is about energy vampires.
One of the best ways to drain people's energy nowadays is via the internet. This woman is an astrophysicist. Actually, this is not how space works. Read a book.
Now, it says, well, from the title, from space. But you find out that it may not be unique. It may be part of life as the theory expands.
Yes. There are certain, what would be classed as pseudoscience ideas of life force, the idea of each living creature has an energy, and within the book itself, they've evolved their science fiction elements to be able to track that in the form of a lambda field, is what they call it. So every single being on Earth has a life force that can be tracked in similar ways to the ideas of, well, martial arts. From my own perspective, I got a lot of the ideas of martial arts and key energy fields and certain things that are explored in, say, Chinese mysticism, Japanese mysticism, and certain elements of their ancient medicine ideas. So the idea of everything having a key field, or key being life energy that is present within the body, present within all living things. The Force.
The Force? The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
I think Lucas got those inspirations from the same sort of sources. But yeah, the idea that they can track these fields, and that is the energy from which the vampires feed on.
Yeah.
Not to spoil.
But also, it doesn't paint the vampires as the masters of it.
Mm.
It seems to paint them as they know part of it, and the characters are exploring more parts of it. Because during the book, it does come across, they come up with their own theory of energy transference, which is non-totally predatory.
Mm.
So it's like a circular transference.
It's also non-terminal as well, because
it explores its ideas. It leaves still meat on the bone for you to ponder.
Yes.
But it does a good job of exploring what it's doing, what it wants.
It comes across, at least in a way that I could make comparisons.
Yes.
Not that I'm stupid. You fuck off. But no, I could at least make comparisons to ideas that I know of, at least in martial arts training, in the ideas of BDSM, in certain ideas that do at least come across in life elements that I'm aware of.
To touch on that, there is a lot of sexual references and also references, explicit descriptions in the book, but I wouldn't say the book itself is
pornographic.
Maybe pornographic, for want of a better term, or even titulating. It does seem
It's rather clinical.
Yeah. It feels like in some parts where you're watching, a procedural crime show and they're describing what happened, it all feels very slightly clinical and slightly removed at times.
Even the sexual elements would be likened to high schoolers being taught sexual education.
Yeah. That's the thing. It doesn't really it doesn't really talk about sex. It talks about foreplay and roleplay.
Yes.
And that's pretty much it.
But it's done so
and sexual leanings, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
When it comes to the actual act of sex, it tends to skip over that in sort of like a one sentence.
Kind of like Tolkien whenever it comes to battles and warfare. I'll describe 50 ways how a tree looks when it comes to a fight.
Yeah. It feels like sex isn't the point, and that's not what the writer wanted to do. So it skips over. It's all about the sexual dynamic and power.
Yeah,
within
power
that.
dynamics
Yeah.
within sexual relationships, or at least
Well, I mean,
certain
not
sexual
even-
relationships.
Not even sexual at some points.
Yeah.
But yeah. But anyway, I mean, that brings us on to the characters. Somewhat. There are, I would say, two main characters.
two major characters.
I mean, basically, all the main characters are male, around the same age. We don't know their ethnicity or background, but
we don't
probably
know.
British. It hints at, just because it's a British space program and stuff like that.
That much is true, but at the same time, well,
Yeah.
For instance, the main character that we do tend to follow is a fella called Olaf Colson, which Olaf tends to suggest some Swedish roots, and there is
Yes.
another Swedish character within.
Yeah, he's. I would say he would.
novel.
Yeah, third. Yeah,
And there's also Dr. Fallada.
Yeah.
And for me, the name Fallada tends to suggest, or at least in my mind when I was reading the book, it tended to suggest a gentleman of Indian, possibly Pakistani descent. That was the impression that I was getting when I was reading it back.
Okay,
I
yeah.
was imagining, at the risk of sounding a bit sort of cliche, sort of wizened, slightly elder gentleman who
Yeah.
has seen quite a lot of things, but also can connect them back to possibly, again, elements in his own cultural heritage, because Indian medicine has some elements of energy fields and like life energies within the body, or at least some of the traditional medicines.
well, I mean, some of the traditional Greek as well.
Mm.
Go back. Anyway, the two main characters, I would say, Fallada, I like the most, although he's basically the scientist of the group. He's cold, clinical, and detached.
Egon.
Also, yes,
Not quite as autistic as Egon,
but yeah.
as far as a Ghostbusters reference.
I mean, he doesn't really develop his character much.
Mm.
His character just feels like he comes on fully formed and he stays the way he is.
Yeah.
Carlson is the one who goes through
The most
some
transformation.
changes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but for me, Carlson was okay at the start. But the more it went on, the more I kind of disliked him. I wouldn't say I hated or really disliked him at the end, but I couldn't see him in a positive at the end.
It was difficult, certainly with some of the actions that he's taking.
Yeah.
As you said earlier, the misogyny element kind of does come through a little bit strong, as if to say, that's a questionable decision from my perspective.
Mm.
But, different strokes. I can't really.
It's just some of the things he does during it. It's just like,
There's other aspects, though, that without going into spoiler territory, I would find it difficult to justify that thinking. His character does go through the most change,
yes,
but there's also potentially a reason for that, which is not necessarily linked to Carlson himself.
yes.
However, whether it's Carlson who is responsible for that, or whether it's
other
you know what I'm talking
influences,
about,
yes.
and there's the
But I mean, that brings in some of the other characters.
Hmm.
There are the space vampires. There's 3 of them, although we only really get to sort of know one, and
Yes.
even then,
And that would be the one that's advertised as feminine.
Yeah, well, there's two which are female. There's a blonde and a brunette.
Mm.
And follows the brunette, sort of.
Yeah. More
like,
so because she's...
Yeah. She's the first one to fully interact.
Yeah. And that's with Carlson himself.
Yeah.
They do identify gender-wise as far as...
I would say initially, but you find out they don't.
Yes. It might even be
And like by the end, you're not sure which one is where.
Yeah.
Without
going into spoilers,
but yeah,
and it's quite difficult.
The other one of the other main characters is the Count.
Greetings, I am the Count.
Do you want to try and pronounce the name?
Gayestam.
It's Swedish, we reckon, so.
Yes.
But he's the Count in it, and
from my limited knowledge of Swedish, that's my pronunciation.
He appears sort of halfway through. He's probably, I would say, the third main character, if you don't include the space vampires themselves.
Yes, he does form a major part in the middle of the book.
Yes.
But he also kind of disappears towards the end.
So however, the other character would be Heseltine.
Yeah.
Who's the policeman.
Mm.
He's the superintendent, I think.
Yeah, I think he's
and
like the head of the yard.
He's mentioned near the start. I think he has 1-2 bits to say. Then he comes in at the end.
Mm.
And then, of course, like these characters, the Count, I think he's fine. He's he's questionable, but he seems to be the most jovial and nice person.
Yes,
in the book.
But he's also the stereotype.
Yes, he's a complete stereotype, and once you see his living accommodations, you realise why he's jovial. I'm just saying that.
Yes.
Heseltine just doesn't really have a character.
No.
At all.
I would say he factors in less as a major character that we're following and more like a side character. Yeah. Which is fine, because I don't think he's supposed to be there he's supposed to be there as a foil, more so, or if nothing else, for someone to report to.
Yeah, I would say in someone so they can access certain things is a key. But yeah, I mean, the only other two minor people in it are, was it Armstrong?
Yes. Again, who comes in the final third.
There's a reason I'm mentioning him, but
yeah,
we'll get to that when we get to it. But yeah, then the other one is Jameson, which I kind of liked. He was the Prime Minister, and it just felt a bit it just felt a bit archaic, especially from our point of view. He was a traditional British Prime Minister. Like, he's of a certain age, of a certain vintage, and he seems very yes, old and upper class.
Yes, but that's also because we're following the perspective of Carlson. That's also the perspective that we're getting of the character as well. Yes. And
however, we also do learn about each of these characters, apart from maybe Heseltine and Falada. They all have somewhat sexual perversions.
Yes. That's, again,
that comes into it.
Described quite clinically,
Yes.
but yeah.
And
you're
without
right.
any sort of judgment, really. It's just, this is it.
But again, possibly because, again, the writer is clearly male, and whether it would have been the same judgment had it been a female with certain
Yes.
perversions, whether
But then
that would have been seen.
there are females with certain perversions in it, but they're only a tiny blip. And
Yeah, blink and you miss it.
yeah, and the only other females in it, they are sort of one note. That tends to be a problem overall, that most of the female characters are one note.
Yeah. Even the character of Coulson's wife, which probably features as
probably
the most prominent
yeah.
female. And even she doesn't really have too much characterization.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm struggling to remember her name. It begins with J. But
Yelda.
yeah, alright.
Again, this is why, well, it's spelt Jelda, I believe in the book, which again suggests a Swedish or Scandinavian origin. So, to go with Olof Coulson,
yeah,
it tends to suggest that that's of Scandinavian or origin as well. Which, considering a lot of the book does take place in Britain and features British citizens. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's characters sort of summarised, gone over. I mean, what's your final thoughts of it? Was it worth reading?
I think it is worth reading. There is certainly elements of it that anyone will be able to pick up, understand. I found it an enjoyable read. It's an interesting one. It's got certain scientific ideas, certain pseudo-scientific ideas.
Yeah.
There's enough to be reading. There's enough to be getting on with.
Yeah.
I think that you would find it an enjoyable.
Yeah. There are some areas which might be problematic. There are some areas which are comical, and they're not meant to be comical.
Yes.
But overall, I'm glad I read it. It's an interesting book.
Yeah, I agree.
But it is very exposition-y. Like, if you're someone who likes, I would say, more action-paced or more, like, a ramping story, might not be for you. It's definitely more people sitting around talking for quite a lot of it. So that's the only thing I would say. Be careful of it if you know what you like or dislike.
Yes. Less action, more talk.
Yes. I mean, so much so it does feel like it starts to ramp up, then they go on holiday, then they come back, and it starts to ramp up again. It does feel a bit odd in places. How things are spaced out. But yeah, I thought it was enjoyable. I liked it. And this is the second time I've read it, so obviously I thought it was okay.
First time for me. I enjoyed. So, join us next week and we'll do the spoiler version review of the book and go into a few of the other elements a little more in detail. Okay.
And we'll mention the film.
Join us next week.
Bye.
We can always cut off this bit at the start of the recording, obviously.
You mean like it? Yeah.
Can I break?
Dance? No.
No, this, there. Yes? There we go. That's what I want.